Welcome to another deep dive. Today's going to be a bit of a head scratcher. We're going to try to wrap our heads around reality itself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no pressure, right?
It's a fun afternoon.
Yeah, I know, right? So the source material you gave me, it's pretty dense, lots of philosophy, science,
Yeah.
kind of woven together. So get ready for some serious mental gymnastics here.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's quite an undertaking to try and develop a framework for understanding all of existence.
That's putting it lightly.
Right. Yeah.
But I think it's cool that it starts with a pretty simple question.
Mhm.
Like, what can we actually know for certain?
Yeah. The source material starts with that, with Descartes' famous "I think, therefore I am," which, a lot of people might just think of as a sort of philosophical cliche.
Sure, yeah. I've definitely heard that before, yeah.
Right. But it's actually a really profound realization, that even if we doubt everything else, like the very act of doubting proves that there's a self doing the doubting.
Okay, so even if there's like some, I don't know, like all-powerful demon tricking us like Descartes imagined, the fact that we're being tricked means we have to exist, right, to be tricked in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, you got it. And the source material is really emphasizing that this isn't just Descartes' personal revelation. It's, a truth that anyone can arrive at through just thinking about it, like introspecting.
Okay, so that's like a good, solid starting point.
Yeah.
But how do we go from that, from like, I think, therefore I am, to, like, understanding all of reality?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The source material brings up this really interesting idea of distinction versus anti-distinction.
Yeah.
And it uses that to sort of explore the limitations of how we perceive and represent reality.
Okay, so break that down for me a little bit. Distinction versus anti-distinction. What are we talking about here?
Well, think of it this way. Distinction is like the act of separating, like saying this is not that. It's how we categorize the world, how we use language, how we make sense of things.
Okay, so distinction is basically how our minds work, right?
Right.
Like constantly drawing boundaries and making categories.
Exactly. Yeah. But then you have anti-distinction, which is kind of the opposite of that. It's the unifying whole, the underlying oneness of reality that exists before we kind of slice it up with our distinctions.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm starting to see where the paradox is here. Like, if we're constantly creating distinctions, can we ever really grasp this anti-distinction, this unifying whole?
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question, right? The source material uses this visual metaphor, which I think is really powerful. Like, imagine a piece of paper, and one side of the paper represents distinction, with all its lines and boundaries and categories, and then the other side, like the blank side of the paper, that's anti-distinction. It's invisible. We can't really represent it, but it's the ground from which distinction arises.
Whoa, okay. I'm trying to picture this here. So are we basically stuck on like the distinction side of the paper, like
Yeah.
forever separated from the true nature of reality?
It's an interesting thought, right? The source material seems to be saying that the very act of observing, of thinking, creates distinction.
Right.
So in a way, we can't really escape it.
So it's almost like we're trying to understand the ocean by like analyzing individual drops of water. We're
Yeah.
kind of missing the big picture. Right?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And this leads us to one of the most mind-boggling ideas that the source material talks about.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
The idea of the infinite size range.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is where we're really going to have to stretch our brains a bit.
Get ready. So the source material argues that the very concept of size exists in a relationship of justification.
Justification.
Yeah. What that means is that each size, like every size we can think of, exists because of the smaller and larger sizes that make it possible.
Okay, so like, for example, atoms exist because of like subatomic particles they're made of.
Yeah.
And those atoms are necessary for molecules to exist and so on and so forth.
Exactly. And what the source is saying is that this relationship, it continues infinitely in both directions, towards the infinitely large and the infinitely small.
Hold on. A universe without a smallest or a largest size? That's a tough one to wrap my head around.
Yeah, it challenges our usual way of thinking about scale, doesn't it? Like we tend to imagine there being like a smallest particle, like an atom.
Right.
Or the largest structure, like a galaxy. But the source is proposing that there are realms of existence that go way beyond anything that we can perceive.
So what does that mean? Like, why is this infinite size range important? Why should I care about this?
Well, for starters, it leads to some pretty radical conclusions about how life arises in the universe. The source argues that within this infinite size range, somewhere, there has to be a shape that can assemble surrounding matter into a similar shape, like a reproducing shape.
So somewhere out there in all that vastness, there just has to be a structure that can, like, replicate itself, just by chance.
That's what the source is arguing, yeah.
Yeah.
And once you have that, you have the potential for variation, for mutation, for the forces of evolution to kind of kick in.
Okay, that is a mind-blowing thought. So an infinite size range makes evolution inevitable.
That's how the source material presents it. And this leads to another fascinating idea, the Big Bang. The event that we typically think of as the beginning of the universe. It might not actually be a unique occurrence.
Wait, so instead of just one Big Bang, there might be an endless cycle of Big Bangs. How does that even work?
The source uses this concept of nothingness summoning energy mass due to the laws of nature. And it's, admittedly a little bit vague on the specifics, but it's suggesting that emptiness itself has like an inherent potential to generate the conditions for a Big Bang.
Okay, this is definitely pushing the limits of what I can grasp right now. So if the Big Bang isn't a singular beginning, how do we even think about time?
That's a great question, and it's a question that I think, might take us, several more deep dives to even begin to answer. But to understand this idea of a recurring Big Bang, we need to go into another one of the concepts that the source material introduces, this idea of energy mass spacetime.
Okay, let's go there. What is this energy mass spacetime all about?
It starts with something you might already be familiar with, Einstein's famous equation, EMC way.
Right.
Einstein connected energy and mass and then speed of light squared.
Right.
Brings in space-time.
Okay, so this equation isn't just some abstract formula. It's like a fundamental truth about the universe, tying together energy, mass, and space-time.
Exactly. And the source really emphasizes that this equation, it holds true everywhere, always. Even in, the emptiness of space, what we might call nothingness.
Wait, so even nothingness has energy, mass, space-time?
Yeah, that's the idea. It's definitely mind-bending. But it means that everything, both existence and non-existence, is ultimately made of this fundamental fabric of energy mass space-time. Like the universe is like woven from this single interconnected entity.
This is definitely stretching my brain in ways I never anticipated.
I know, right? It's a lot to take in, but it's also, I think, incredibly elegant in its simplicity. And it has these really profound implications for how we understand, well, everything, from the Big Bang to, like you said, the nature of reality itself. But I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part.
Yeah, we have.
Maybe we should take a little break and then we can pick up this thread in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it.
It's really amazing how this source manages to connect these like really abstract concepts back to our everyday experience.
Yeah. It's definitely a lot to digest. But I'm starting to see how all these pieces kind of fit together,
Yeah.
Like they're painting this bigger picture of reality. So where do we go from here? Like, how does this source material like build on this foundation of energy, mass, space-time?
Well, it goes back to that idea of representation that we were talking about, like how we as humans try to make sense of this vast interconnected reality.
Right. That paper analogy with the distinction on one side and the anti-distinction on the other.
Exactly. And the source uses this to kind of delve into the nature of knowledge itself. It argues that even our most sophisticated scientific models, they're still just representations. They're maps of the territory, not the territory itself.
Okay, yeah, I get that. Like, we're always looking at reality through the lens of our own minds, right? Using language and concepts to kind of create this model of what we're observing. But if we can't directly perceive anti-distinction, that unifying whole, how can we even talk about it? Like, how can we even be sure it exists?
Yeah, that's where things get really tricky. The source offers like a few different arguments for why we should believe that this anti-distinction exists, even if we can't directly perceive it. One argument is based on the limitations of representation itself. Like, even if we imagine a representation that's infinitely detailed and complex, it still wouldn't capture the entirety of reality.
Why not? It seems like a perfect map would basically be the same thing as a territory.
Right, but that's where the distinction versus anti-distinction paradox comes in. Representation always involves distinction, like you're separating the representer from the represented.
Okay.
Anti-distinction, by definition, it resists that kind of separation.
So it's like trying to describe silence with words. Like the very act of describing it kind of contradicts what you're trying to convey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. The source also argues that since anti-distinction is literally the opposite of distinction, it can't be captured by anything that involves distinction.
Which includes all representations.
Right, exactly. And this leads to a pretty fascinating conclusion.
What's that?
It means that reality has to be infinite.
Okay.
Because if it were finite, we could theoretically encompass it with a representation, right? Even a really, really complex one. But because representation always involves distinction and anti-distinction is the opposite of that, reality itself must be infinite. Like it has to be beyond our ability to fully grasp.
So our inability to represent reality is kind of proof of its infinite nature.
Yeah, in a way, it's a pretty mind-blowing idea, right?
It is. It is.
And it also kind of ties back to the idea of the infinite size range. You know, if reality is truly infinite, then there are no limits to the scales of existence, from the infinitely small to the infinitely large. And somewhere within that vastness,
There has to be other forms of life, other civilizations asking these same questions. It's kind of exhilarating and humbling at the same time, you know?
it really is. And it raises another interesting question. If this understanding of reality, this three-pillar existential theory, is as universal as the source claims, what does that mean for humanity? What does that mean for our future?
Okay, yeah, no, I'm completely hooked now. But before we go too far down that road, can we back up for a second? I'm still trying to wrap my head around the practical implications of all this.
Right.
How does this grand theory of existence connect to our everyday lives? Like, why should I care about these abstract concepts?
That's a great question, and the source does address it. It argues that this understanding of reality can actually be a really powerful tool for peace and understanding.
Really? How so?
Well, think about it. If we accept that the universe is built on this foundation of interconnectedness, of energy, mass, space-time, it really challenges our tendency towards separation and conflict.
So instead of seeing ourselves as like isolated individuals or, competing groups, we start to recognize our shared existence, our interconnectedness with everything around us.
Exactly, yeah. And that shift in perspective can have a profound impact on how we relate to each other, to the planet, to existence itself.
It's like that saying, we are all waves in the same ocean.
Yeah.
You know, we might have different forms, different movements, but we're ultimately part of the same vast interconnected whole.
Exactly. And this understanding can also guide us in how we navigate the complexities of knowledge and belief. The source really emphasizes that our mental models, our representations of reality, they're always evolving, always subject to revision.
So we should be open to new information, new ways of seeing the world, even if they challenge our existing beliefs.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of a scientific mindset, right? It embraces uncertainty, encourages curiosity, and constantly seeks a more complete understanding of the universe.
Yeah, okay, I'm really starting to see the value in this framework. It's not just about these, abstract philosophical concepts. It's about how we live our life, how we relate to the world around us.
It is. And, it even challenges the traditional concept of a singular, anthropomorphic God. Well, the source argues that reality itself, this infinite size range of energy, mass, space-time, is the ultimate explanation for our existence. There's no need for a supernatural creator, separate from the universe itself.
So it's suggesting that the laws of nature, the fundamental properties of reality, are enough to explain how everything came to be.
That's the argument. And what's compelling is that it doesn't rely on faith or dogma. It's based on a logical progression from that foundational truth of, I think, therefore I am, coupled with, our scientific understanding of the universe.
I can see how that would be appealing to some, but I imagine a lot of people, especially those with strong religious beliefs, might find this idea pretty challenging.
Oh, absolutely. It's a radical departure from, traditional religious worldviews. And that's where the source gets really interesting. It actually delves into the historical and psychological factors that have shaped our understanding of God and religion.
Okay, yeah, I'm curious to hear more about that.
So the source kind of traces the evolution of religious beliefs. Starting with the idea that early humans, with their limited understanding of the world, may have personified natural forces or, sought explanations for the unknown through supernatural beings.
It's like those ancient myths and creation stories.
Yeah.
Trying to explain the unexplainable through narratives and metaphors.
Exactly, yeah. And as societies became more complex, these beliefs kind of evolved into more structured religious systems, often with elaborate rituals and, moral codes and hierarchical structure.
Right. I can see how that would have provided a sense of order and stability in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. But didn't the source also mention some potential downsides to this development?
It did. The source argues that while these systems can provide, comfort and a sense of community, they can also be used to reinforce power structures and social control. It points to the role of religion in, conflict and violence throughout history, highlighting the dangers of dogma and the us versus them mentality that can often accompany rigid belief systems.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. It seems like the source is walking a fine line here, acknowledging the positive aspects of religion while also critiquing its potential for harm.
Right, it's a nuanced perspective, and the source ultimately seems to be suggesting that this three-pillar existential theory, with its emphasis on interconnectedness and the inherent wonder of reality itself, could offer like an alternative path, a way to move beyond these divisions.
It's a compelling vision, but I'm sure a lot of people would argue that it's too idealistic,
Yeah.
you know, too divorced from the realities of human nature. After all, we're wired for competition, for self-preservation, for seeking advantage over others.
You're right. Human nature is complex, and the source acknowledges that. It points to the fact that our brains evolved in a very different environment than the one we inhabit today. For most of human history, survival depended on recognizing patterns, quickly assessing threats, and forming strong bonds with our in-group.
So our brains are still running ancient software in a modern world. No wonder we struggle with these big-picture concepts.
In a way, yeah. But the source argues that we're not trapped by our evolutionary past. Through education, critical thinking, and a conscious effort to expand our understanding, we can actually rewire our brains, cultivate new ways of thinking and being.
So it's a matter of recognizing those ingrained patterns and choosing to act differently,
Yeah.
to embrace a more expansive worldview.
Exactly. And the source provides a pretty compelling framework for doing just that. This understanding of reality, of the infinite size range, energy mass space-time, and the paradox of distinction and anti-distinction. It challenges our assumptions, it expands our awareness, and it invites us to participate in a much grander narrative than the one we've inherited.
Yeah, it's a tall order for sure, but I'm starting to see how it's possible. And with that in mind, I think we need to delve into the source's ideas about evolution and the implications of this worldview for humanity's future. Perhaps we should continue this fascinating discussion in the final part of our deep dive. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into reality. We've gone from like Descartes to like the infinite size range, energy, mass, space-time, all this crazy stuff. I'm ready to see where the source material takes us next, especially
Yes.
when it comes to like evolution and what all this means for humanity.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the source manages to connect these like abstract ideas to something like evolution, which feels much more concrete.
Right, yeah. In the last part, we were talking about how an infinite size range basically makes the existence of a reproducing shape somewhere in the universe pretty much inevitable.
Yeah.
But I'm still not quite clear on how that simple idea leads to like the incredible complexity of life that we see all around us.
Right. Well, that's where those fundamental principles of evolution come in. You have life and death, you have variation in offspring, you have mutation. And once you have that initial spark of replication, those principles kind of become the engine behind this incredible increase in complexity.
So it's like setting off a chain reaction. Like you have
Yeah.
that first domino falling and then
And then you have this incredible unfolding of life driven by those evolutionary forces. And the source takes us on this journey through, some of the key milestones, the emergence of multicellular organisms, the development of immune systems, the rise of social structures and hierarchies. It's a really fascinating, albeit simplified, narrative of life's journey.
it's amazing to think that all this complexity, all this diversity of life could arise from a simple reproducing shape somewhere out there in the vastness of existence. But how does this connect to us, to humans? Where do we fit into this grand narrative?
Well, the source really dives into the evolution of the human brain, and particularly the neocortex, highlighting its role in our ability to adapt and thrive. It argues that the neocortex, that flexible part of our brains that allows us to, learn and problem solve, was key to our evolutionary success.
So our big brains, our ability to like think abstractly and solve complex problems, that's all a result of the challenges our ancestors face, like constantly needing to adapt to new environments and social situations.
Yeah, that's one of the key arguments that the source makes. It suggests that, the pressure to navigate those complex social hierarchies, to plan for the future, to outcompete rivals, all of these factors played a significant role in shaping our cognitive abilities.
So it wasn't just about like surviving in the physical world is also about succeeding in the social world.
Mm.
It makes you wonder if intelligence is as much a social adaptation as a physical one.
Yeah, it's a really compelling idea, and the source actually makes this fascinating connection between those social pressures and the development of the concept of God.
Hold on. How do we go from big brains and social hierarchies to the concept of God?
Well, the source proposes that early humans, driven by those same social instincts that shape their brains, might have projected those hierarchical impulses onto their understanding of the universe.
Okay, so the idea of like a supreme being, a God who rules over everything, that could be a reflection of our own social structures, our experience of power and authority.
That's the suggestion, and it's pretty thought-provoking, isn't it? The source actually traces the evolution of religious beliefs from those early, animistic notions to more structured systems with, gods and goddesses, and then finally to this concept of a single, all-powerful God.
So those early attempts to make sense of the world, to explain the unexplainable, they might have actually laid the groundwork for the complex religious systems that we see today. It seems like the source is drawing this direct line from our evolutionary past to our spiritual beliefs.
Exactly. And while the source, acknowledges the role of these beliefs in providing comfort and meaning and social cohesion, it also points to the potential downsides.
Right. We talked about that in the last part, like the dangers of dogma, the justification of violence, the us versus them mentality that can, arise when beliefs become rigid and intolerant.
Yeah, exactly. And the source seems to be suggesting that this three-pillar existential theory, with its emphasis on interconnectedness, the infinite size range, and the inherent wonder of reality itself, could offer a more complete and ultimately more satisfying explanation for our existence than, any traditional religious worldview.
But how do we, reconcile this theory with the deeply ingrained religious beliefs that so many people hold dear? It seems like a pretty big ask to ask people to abandon their faith in favor of this new way of understanding reality.
It's definitely a challenge, yeah. And the source doesn't really offer any easy answers, but it does emphasize the importance of critical thinking, of open-mindedness, of a willingness to question even our most cherished beliefs.
So it's not about forcing people to abandon their faith. It's about encouraging a more nuanced, more informed perspective.
Yeah, I think that's the message. And the source seems to believe that as our understanding of the universe expands, this more universal worldview will inevitably gain traction.
It's a hopeful vision, isn't it? A vision of a future where humanity kind of transcends its tribalistic tendencies and embraces this more unified understanding of reality. As we're wrapping up this deep dive, I'm struck by the sheer scale and complexity of it all.
Yeah, me too. I mean, we've covered so much ground, from the foundations of, certain truth to the mind-boggling implications of an infinite size range, and yet I have a feeling we've only just scratched the surface.
You're right. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener, a reminder that there's always more to learn, more to explore, more to discover about the universe and our place in it. And perhaps, as the source suggests, this journey of discovery is itself a reflection of that fundamental drive towards greater complexity, that evolutionary impulse that has shaped life from the very beginning.
It's a beautiful thought, and it leaves us with the final provocative question to ponder. If this worldview, this three-pillar existential theory, is indeed shared by advanced civilizations across the universe, what does that mean for humanity's future? What possibilities might unfold as we continue to explore the infinite size range of reality? It seems we've reached the end of our deep dive, but the journey of understanding has just begun.